Hey, Kendall, how's Commissioner Harrington doing?
Thank you for asking. Deputy Commissioner Degree might be more posed to speak, but he's okay. Obviously, that was quite the scary experience for his family.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you want to weigh in, but thankfully everyone was okay. There was no major injuries. Yeah.
Andy's on a well-deserved vacation right now, so he's out in Minnesota. So it was a tough week, but they're doing all right.
Yeah, I'm sure just the mental issues, especially for the kids, it's got to be pretty rough.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Help! I'm in Teams hell.
Oh no, we can hear you.
How do you guys bear Teams? It's unbelievable. Well, first I was sent to chat, and then that was anyway. And now something's beeping like it's going to explode.
That's at my store.
Oh, good. I thought
the bomb somebody just left.
I thought, oh, this is another part of Teams hell. It's going to explode.
No. I think, Mike, are you desensitized to the beeping at this point?
Off and on.
Yeah.
That's people asking for me to turn the gas pumps on, or they just finished. So
yeah.
When people first start, they don't hear it, and then after a while, you don't hear it.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like lawn signs. You stop seeing.
Yep, it's true. Or telephone poles or anything else.
Yeah.
So it looks like the 5 formal task force members are all here, accounted for and present. If we want to start, sorry, I'm just jumping in, but if someone else wants to take over, I'm 100% okay with that. Abby has volunteered, at least for today, to take minutes and notes for us. Thank you, Abby, for doing that and providing that support. And I saw Melissa had sent around the draft agenda, and I know we had a little back and forth, but it seems like we're probably able to hold fairly true to that with David here. Thank you, David. Maybe we should start with introductions, even though I know we all know each other, just for the record, and then we can dive in. So I'm Kendall Smith. I'm Governor Scott's Director of Policy Development and Legislative Affairs, and he appointed me, apologies, to serve on this task force.
Who are you going to pass it to?
I'll pass it to you, Senator.
I'm Allison Clarkson. I am one of the 3 Windsor District Senators. I serve at the moment as Majority Leader of the Senate and as Vice Chair of Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And I pass it to Adam.
Hi there, Adam Grinold. I'm the chair of the statewide Workforce Development Board.
And you pass it to?
Sorry, Abby.
Hi everyone, I'm Abby Rim. I'm the acting executive director of the State Workforce Development Board. Ellen?
Ellen Kaler, Executive Director of Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, a member of the State Workforce Development Board, and just here as a guest.
I guess I'll go.
Mike.
I'm Representative Mike Marcotte from Coventry, and I chair House Commerce and Economic Development.
I'm Sarah Buxton. I'm the Director of Workforce Development at the Department of Labor, and I'm excited to see you all. David?
David, our dear David Hall.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Good to see you, even if virtually. My name is David Hall. I'm one of the attorneys in the Office of Legislative Counsel for the legislature. I typically staff workforce development, economic development, among other things. So glad to be here.
Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Debbie DeMoore with the Department of Buildings and General Services, Director of Purchasing and Contracting and I'm here to support however I can. Thank you.
We have that $250,000 appropriation if we want to put that out to contracts, so Deb can help answer any questions around our state bulletins in that regard. Deputy Commissioner, do you want to say hello?
Sure, Deputy Commissioner Dustin Degree. Here, because Mike can't be, but I think you can expect a combination of Mike and myself, if not both, through most of the meetings if we're available, just as we look forward to any policies that'll have to come out of the Department of Labor. Also, former Executive Director, State Workforce Development Board, former Director of Workforce Expansion for the Governor. So I know everybody here.
And key former senator.
And key former state senator, Franklin County. Best job.
Least well paid.
Worst paying job I've ever liked.
So there's 5 of us formally on the task force. Thank you for the guests that have joined us today. Our first item agenda that Melissa from AOA, who's also providing technical and logistical support for us, suggested is organization moving forward. The statute doesn't designate a chair or talk about electing one. I know we're not a big group with only 5, but we should probably talk about if we want to have a chair and how we want to organize ourselves moving forward.
I'd like to move and we're doing this in formal procedural motions and votes. Is that how we'll be operating? If so, I'd like to move that Mike Marcotte be our chair.
I would second that if Rep. Marcotte is interested and willing.
Oh, Kendall, key question.
I'm fine with that.
All right.
So how do you want to, maybe the other part would be how do you want to do, how formal do we want, like how formally do we want to take actions? I think we can probably decide like how do we take votes at the end as we go, but I feel like we don't have to be super formal.
It's hard to be super formal with 5 people who know each other pretty well.
Yeah.
If Dustin's being recognized as a former senator, I also just want to point out Sarah Buxton, also former key representative.
Sorry. He was listing all his things.
I know.
As yeah.
Well, in that case, Senator Clarkson's also a former representative.
That's true.
This is true. Happily. We're all alums. A parade.
Mike, how do you want, I think the other thing on the agenda, I don't know if you have it and you want to take over the meeting, but the other order of business I think we probably wrap up is the administrative functions and how, like, as chair, do you want to be the recipient of and the person who controls all the paper flow? What kind of administrative support do you think you need and that we need?
Well, I don't need to control paper flow. I think paper flow should go to all the members when it's sent out. So no, I don't need that. I think we can figure out our agendas before we leave and our date times and how we want to continue to go about our work. See it more of a collaborative process amongst all the members and me trying to figure things out.
So Kendall, can we still depend on Melissa? I don't know if Melissa's listening in. I don't think so. But can we depend on Melissa?
She can still help with sending out
Scheduling and
scheduling invites and like logistical back end support, but it's probably unlikely that she'll be joining meetings in person and playing an active role in that sense. But in terms of being the keeper of formal records. She's happy to do that. They've set up a landing page on AOA's
Okay.
website, since they're charged with providing that type of support, where we can be posting materials should we have them. So we can still count on Melissa to help with some of that. And Abby
Public-
has said she'd be willing to help join as well, again, with like minute taking and some of that administrative support if needed.
So if I
Do we
can
need
just-
public meetings?
Yeah, can I throw something out for future meetings? Something I was thinking about this morning was that I can talk with Mike Ferrant, and if it's possible for one of our legislative staff persons to actually set up Zoom for us so that we can record these meetings, so that, you know, anybody that's interested can go back and look at you know, what we're talking about and what we're looking at. May be easier than doing Teams.
Yeah.
Because I know you don't have that recording capacity.
So it actually is, so this meeting actually, so that's something we should pause. This meeting is being recorded right now.
Okay.
I didn't push, someone must have pushed the record
Sorry,
button.
that was
It's
me.
okay.
I started recording in the
It's
transcription.
okay. So it's an important disclaimer. This is being recorded and we can post the video after. But
okay.
what's different from Teams is that if you want to be listening in, you have to be actively on the
Okay, it's
link
not
the way
live
that
stream.
others are today. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Well, we might further discuss that, because I think this is such an important subject for so many in the state at the moment and around the country, obviously. But I think we'd want to make our deliberations as accessible and transparent as possible.
Mhm.
So I don't know if Teams is the ideal venue for that.
It is completely fine with me, and I think the administration participants, if we want to use Zoom. That is a-okay.
Okay. When we finish up, I'll talk with Mike Ferrant
Okay.
and see if we can get that set up for our next meeting and continue forward with that on our subsequent meetings. I think it'd just make it easier for the public to be able to live stream it. And I think it's easier also, so they don't have to actually join the feed.
Right. Right. Or be invited as a guest, as we had to do today with Ellen and Tristan.
Right.
Right. So I had hoped that we might revisit the agenda, just because I felt like we were diving in before we really had done sort of, I know part of our objective today is to organize ourselves, get a sense of when we might be able to meet, get a sense of the support team that will help enable our work. But also, you know, identify the problem that we're trying to solve. And it's some of it, and to go through the legislative intent that we articulated as best we could in S11, which became Act 183, is that right? Section 5. And we worked, Mike and I and our committees worked as, you know, closely with David fashioning this. And I think that charge really is critical for us to understand and go through, obviously. And then I think all of us need to come into some agreement and agree on the problem we're trying to solve. And I think those two go sort of obviously hand in hand.
And so my thought was that we would have David walk us through the statutory charge within Act 183. And there were 3 pieces that are in there that asked us to review, you know, who the champion is for workforce development, what their charge is, also looking at the State Workforce Development Board and the makeup of it, and, you know, what is contained in statute, the requirements there. Also, there were a review of WIOA and Wagner Perkins, but in talking to David yesterday afternoon, you know, he started to look at this, and he said that is a huge piece that he needs a lot more time to bone up on, and You know, we might be able to get more information from Sarah when we talk about those two pieces, just to review them this morning. And then going from there, I would leave it up to the committee on, you know, how do you want to fashion the rest of the agenda? That's my suggestion anyway.
Yeah, I think we add to that the fourth, which is looking at, you know, I mean, really this came from how do we better coordinate this system? And some of those are sub pieces of it, but how do we better coordinate the whole system statewide, both state agency and non-governmental agencies, all the pieces that are contributing to our to the workforce development system. And so I think that's really the big picture concern and hope that we can come up with a way up, you know, the part of that number 4 is a plan that coordinates and envisions an integrated state workforce development plan that spans all workforce service delivery systems. It's sort of embedded in number 4.
I'll just jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
Right. And
Okay.
the other is, of course, reviewing the statutory role of the commissioner. And because we had several years ago, as Sarah knows, because we worked with her on this, embedded this responsibility with a service provider. And I think that's one of our challenges, is that we need to probably review that. So we have that in number 1, reviewing the statutory role of the Commissioner of Labor with this.
Right. Yeah, and when I refer to champion, the champion is the commissioner of the Department of Labor. I think that's how, when we created the statute, I think that's how we named that position as the champion for workforce. Sarah?
So I think as I look at the statute, I think for today, the bites that we might be able to take, especially with David with us and being able to offer some initial perspective and packaging, it's clear there's a product that we have to produce, this committee, and we only have a short amount of time to do it. So that looks like it's an E. It looks like there are considerations that we have to weigh as we develop that product. And there are tools that we have available to us, both administrative, legislative council, and this bid. The bid process, if it hasn't been said yet, or people don't have a full appreciation, and I'm sorry, Deb, this is going to come off a little negative. The bid process is a bear. And that's why I especially requested that Kendall ask Deb to be here today. So I think if we could perhaps have David go through the product that we have to produce, the considerations that we have to weigh, and the tools that we have available. If at the very least, we can decide how we want to use those tools, especially the bid process, in deciding whether a consultant comes back with some more expert level analysis of some of the things we have to consider. Because while you can depend on me, my concern is my capacity and my own, expertise. I can give you a perspective, but I think it's important to have a third party expert to really be able to present to this in a sort of more unbiased way to this group some of the things that you've asked the legislature's asked us to consider. So I'm wondering if David walks us through those sections, and then we can all agree that at the end, I think it's pretty clear that we have to create a product. I know I personally, when we get to the developing the RFP for the consultant, there are other considerations that I think are missing from this, like the federal requirements around a one-stop system, and the weight and the purpose of the WEO estate plan. So I'll reserve that may not be today. It may be some sort of small subcommittee between these next meetings, but I'm wondering if you would agree that the product, the considerations, and if we can at least decide how we want to use that 250,000 and set up some sort of process for helping to design that RFP, that and what's in it, that we need to get the ball rolling on if we're going to consider that before our report in January. So I'll be quiet and see what you think of that.
Hear, hear.
No, I agree. And I think we really have to understand WIOA, what the federal requirements are, and what's required of us, and what we have to have in state statute in order to meet the requirements of WIOA.
But I would agree, it would be great to get a national perspective. I mean, it with a consultant, so that we see where we are. I mean, I'm sure Sarah has and Dustin maybe have a better sense of this than and Ellen probably, than the rest of us. But it would be, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Other states are struggling with the same challenges we are. And to take advantage of somebody like a Kate Ash, who has a national perspective on the workforce challenges facing every state and how we integrate and use WIOA, how we use our own tools and resources. So I think if the RFP process is a pain in the neck, which we know it is, we should move on that ASAP, because I think that national perspective is going to be very helpful for us.
While we're talking about that part of the topic here, what I really want us to make sure we understand is, in those states that are doing this successfully, that are likely rural states, smaller population states, how does the different arms of the government work together when they're doing this? So in what way does this function? And that's, to me, I think the big challenge that we have, right, is, so we've got this sort of non-government element that's outside of the WIOA directly, that's part of the system. How do they interact with within the state government? And then how do all the different agencies and departments interact under this sort of Office of Innovation, if that's the model they use, or whatever the model they use? How does that work?
Yeah. Kendall?
I was gonna just, sorry, my comments are maybe a little moldy now because they were from a few minutes ago, underscore the urgency, because if our product is due January 15th, I think it's safe to say we probably wouldn't get an RFP out till, in just theory, best case scenario, end of this month. And then you have to obviously have it open for 2 to 3 weeks or more for people to bid, and then going to contract with somebody can take another 2 weeks. And so it's like, at that point, we're going to be into like October and asking this consultant, I know best case scenario, like they're gonna have like a 2-month runway or less to deliver the product. So we will need to prioritize getting the RFP written and deciding on the scope and getting that out quickly if we want to take advantage of these dollars. The other potential option, thinking through this too, is, Deb, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe if it's $100,000, you can do a no bid contract. So I don't know if there's any interest. This is a brainstorm, just bear with me, brainstorm. So if we had somebody already on contract somewhere in state government, like a Guidehouse, for example, I don't know if Guidehouse does this type of work or not, where we wanted to extend a contract and pay under $100,000, that might allow us to move a little bit more quickly, because then we're not having to go through the RFP process, but then again, we're leaving about 150 on the table. Are those numbers right, Deb?
So anything under 100,000, we could do a simplified bid. So if there's three vendors or 3 firms that we want to solicit, we could solicit from 3 firms. If we don't do anything competitively, anything over 10,000, we'd have to get a sole source approval from the administration. But if we have 3, if we're under 100,000, and we have 3 firms that we feel may be qualified, then we could do a simplified bid. So we're still putting together a scope of work. We're still out doing outreach. And if we only get 1 bid, we've still satisfied the requirement of soliciting a minimum of 3.
Bulletin 3.5.
Yes. So consistent with that. And I don't see anywhere that we waived any provisions to 3.5 for this. So we would need to follow that at this point. Yeah.
That might make good sense. My guess is any consultant we would be hiring already has most of this information in terms of a national perspective. I mean, it exists. So, I mean, that might not take a vast amount of time to pull that piece together. But what would maybe be the big time, obviously, is working with us with a going forward. So anyway, I have no idea what this costs or what somebody like K-Dash costs. It's beyond. I just have no experience with that recently.
Sarah?
I know this was modeled somewhat like the special committee on higher education. I was part of that group that also had an extremely accelerated timeline. And I'm offering this. I agree that we could parse out the consultancy work and particularly get some, comprehensive analysis of the different laws. I'm happy to also add things that I think would be a helpful analysis. And you don't need subject matter expertise. I think even any good firm with, some good policy folks could be able to provide some of this analysis. But with the other organization or the other committee that this was somewhat structured on, there is the possibility, and I know you as legislators have been on the receiving side of this, of us communicating and acknowledging that we may not meet a deadline and having a partial product produced at the January 15th deadline and reserving both the funding and the phase 2 of some consultancy work for a potential later date. And that's how we sought some out of session approval or at least agreement with legislative leadership to be able to do that so that we could structure a $300,000 consultancy contract in organizing some policy and then some financials. So the understanding and then, the actual creation of the roadmap might be a second step. So I don't know if the committee would be open to acknowledging that we could ask, I suppose, for some phased approach to this and a little bit of an extension.
I think that's a great and creative idea and a good one that we have used many times in the past. And I think maybe we should be revisiting that idea, see how far we get, and with that in the back of our minds, have that fuller discussion in early November or something, once we've gone down the road a bit and seen what, seeing how we're doing. But that in our back pocket, Sarah, is our back pocket is full. With that, that's a good idea.
Yeah. Dustin?
Yeah, Deb, I'm just curious, what does it take to get a sole source process approved? I know it's not impossible. Is that any quicker? And if this group could figure out or identify who or what entity they wanted to push that sole source to, I know Allison said Kate, I think she would be great, or even other NGA/CSG/NACL type contracts. We have NASWA, which is our kind of governing body in labor. They have a whole workforce board. So there are national organizations that do this. I'm wondering if there was, what are the hurdles to get a sole source contract approved? And if that's something that could be done quicker, it might be easier as far as getting the ball rolling, knowing that we know some folks at AOA.
That we do. It takes justification. Why do we not? So it's really approval by the administration for us to sole source, and we have to justify our rationale for doing that. So I don't have 3.5 in front of me right now, but there's an urgent nature of what needs to be done. There's a few things that we look at, but it would be writing up a justification and having the administration review. And if they approve it, then we could go forward and write the contract. It usually takes maybe a week, to get their approval. But if we were to do a standard bid or simplified bid, you know, the effort is more in writing the requirements that we need and putting that out to bid. At a minimum, 3.5 says we have to publicly post it for 5 working days. But again, if we have a solicitation that is, or if we have a requirement that's less than 100,000, we can just go to 3 known firms. But sole sourcing is an option, but we just have to get it approved.
That might be worth looking at.
Adam?
Yeah, I guess following up on that is NGA is currently supporting the workforce board. So I wonder if they're under contract for that, and if so, would that help with the NGA process? And I don't know if $100,000 does it. That seems like a solution. If it doesn't, then maybe we have to consider the sole source to move forward with them. Certainly, they know the state. They can pick up where they've already left off, and would be a great group, in my opinion, to pursue this.
Oh yeah, that's great. Oh, and that's how we had them at the workforce board meeting. Got it.
But we don't have a formal contract with them right now. We're not paying them
Yeah.
for any services at the moment. So that's something that we've talked about, but there's no formal agreement going on at the moment, just to be clear.
My experience with the simplified bid process is it is definitely simplified. I feel a little weird about putting ourselves in the position of asking the administration to go and do a sole source, only because I'll just be honest, as a state entity that has to follow the rules and the high bar that we have against sole source contracting, I don't know that it would be that sole source is necessary for expert. There are more than one, and there is more than one entity that has some expertise in this. So I think we may want to be a little careful if we don't have to do sole source, and we could go through the simplified bid process. I think maybe we just get really clear with what we want and send those bids out to the requirements to those. Deb, correct me if I'm wrong. We just send them out to those organizations. We kind of assess their responses and their costs, and then we can move forward with selecting one, and we may be able to just step aside from the whole sole source piece.
Oh, yep. Go ahead, Kendall.
I was just going to offer what might provide us more clarity, and I don't know if we'll get to it today, but once we decide the scope of the RFP, then we might have a better idea of if that's something that we think we should, basically how we move forward, whether it's a simplified bid, a sole source, or the good old regular RFP process. Because if it's, I'll give an example. So right now, Guidehouse is actually doing some programmatic reviews and impact assessments for us across the enterprise. Some of those are workforce. And so I'm pretty excited to hopefully with this group, once we have those scorings on those program performances from Guidehouse on some of those workforce programs, show them here. If we wanted to use some of this money in the scope to do more workforce program assessments that we otherwise wouldn't have capacity to do, especially in the time frame that we have, we could theoretically, right, if that was part of our scope, like we could potentially just extend our contract with Guidehouse. But if we want the kitchen sink, like if we want someone who's going to come in and facilitate these meetings and do program reviews and make recommendations for us on other state models and do like intensive stakeholder engagement and interviews, then we might, that's probably going to be more expensive, and we're going to need to do the full $250,000 and go through a regular bid process. So once we determine the scope, that might lead us down which path we need to go.
This is Deb. Kendall, I agree. And I also think that our first choice is always to conduct a competitive bid process. That's always our first choice. And only if it's necessary to justify and in sole source, do we do that. So if we can, that would be my recommendation. But again, I'm here to support however we want to approach it and do what needs to be done. But I think identifying the scope is a great first start, because I feel like I'm not sure what that is yet. And So to put that down would, I think, be very helpful.
Yeah, let's not put the cart before
So-
the horse.
So I think we've done a good job of moving around the agenda instead of following it. So why don't we just have David walk us through the statutory charge, and then kind of let's review the things. And I agree with Kendall. Once we get through these reviews and everybody has a good understanding of what's there now and what do we need to do, then we can figure out how to proceed with a bidding process. And I mean, I would agree that I'm not really crazy about a sole source. I would rather see some type of bidding process, whether it's just having 3 bids. But I think if we can go that route, that we would be better off in the long run. So without any objections and any other questions from members, I asked David to walk us through the statutory charge.
Can we do that now, Mr. Chair?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you, David.
All right. Am I able to share my screen through Teams with you all?
Yes, you should see an eye. Yep, you're doing it. You did it.
So everybody's seeing section 5 here.
We were, David, but now it just looks like your background. It's plain blue. But we did a second ago. There we
Oh,
go.
there you
It's
go.
back.
Sorry, I moved my
Yeah.
window.
And
Dave,
David, could
are
you
you able to
potentially zoom
expand
in?
it?
Yeah, can you zoom in a little bit for us?
How is that?
That's great. Thank you.
Perfect.
All right. So I was trying to remember how long I've been working on this question of the workforce development system, and it's been a while. And I'm thinking back to Michelle Coopersmith and Chris Bray chairing a summer study that sought to wrap its arms around the system and produce a comprehensive inventory of all the programs and where they live and who manages them. And in the end, I think it produced an Excel spreadsheet that was hundreds of pages long. And I don't know if it had every program in it or not. I'm not sure if that mission was completely accomplished. I don't actually remember. It's been a while. And with Bill Botso and several others also trying to, I think, answer the same question that this section 5 proposes, which is how do we wrestle this system? How do we manage it? How do we wrap our arms around it? And here we are again with Act 183. This was S11. And you remember this was the workforce development bill from the most recent session. And among all the different funding streams, et cetera, there was this special oversight committee created with the charge of looking at the optimal organizational structure of the system and determining what the best approach forward would be. And that is a super simple way of, I appreciate describing an extremely complex problem. So it's predicated here on these findings, which I don't think are going to be news to any of you. I think everybody in this meeting is more experienced than I am in the reality of what's going on in the Vermont labor market. So I'm going to just appreciate that the committees of jurisdiction worked with the department to produce these numbers and make these findings in this section, describing the challenges that are being faced right now in the state and the system. And of course, we have the composition here in subsection B of the committee. So here you are. This is how you got here. Congratulations. C1 and 2 I just want to note that in case you didn't already realize that some of you may be able to be paid for this work in the nominal fashion that all of your work is paid for. And I just applaud you all coming off a primary season of how hard you all work, whether you're elected or a fellow government employee. I know how much work goes into this relative to the amount of accolade you receive. D, the FY23 appropriation, as you have been discussing, is general fund. It's through the Agency of Administration, who shall use the funds pursuant to the direction of this committee and the performance of its work, including to engage the services of one or more experts in the field of workforce development, organization management, or other relevant fields as necessary to assist the committee in its work. So, general fund, 250,000, that's a very flexible source of funding. The including language, of course, means it's the words here are non-exhaustive. You can use it for the things that you think are appropriate. E, this is your deliverable, and it's a big one. So the date, as noted, is January 15th, which is, obviously fairly typical for reports due back to the legislature. This would go to the House Commerce Committee and Senate Economic Development Committees specifically. And 2 points. So this is an action plan. I think that that's important. Ultimately, what your work product is going to be up to you. I don't think there's any special magic to the words action plan. It doesn't call for necessarily legislative recommendations or draft legislation. It doesn't even have to be written necessarily. But we've dubbed it an action plan, and that has to do these two things here in 1 and 2. Identify the optimal organizational structure for the Vermont Workforce Development System, under which a single government entity, office, or executive position is charged with the authority and duty to coordinate workforce development efforts across state government in close partnership and coordination with non-governmental partners and achieve the goals of the state of Vermont strategic plan. And 2, identifies action steps, timelines, and resource needs to complete the transition to this new organizational structure. So again, I think that, 1, for me personally at least, has those echoes of where does the central leadership come from? If we have so many economic development programs on that Excel spreadsheet spread out across so many entities in government, who in the end should be, or should there be, I think is a fundamental question, should there be a single person, and if so, or agency, department, whatever, and if so, who should that be? And I think obviously that's anticipated later in the legislation when we're going to talk about 10 VSA 540. But I'll stop there on the action plan. So F, the Special Oversight Committee, in coordination with the Secretary of Administration and any experts retained with funding provided in this section, shall do 4 things specifically. 1, review the statutory role of the Commissioner of Labor as the leader of workforce education and training in the state and the authority, responsibilities, and duties conferred on the Commissioner in 10 VSA 540. 2, review the composition and size of the State Workforce Development Board created in 10 VSA 541A and review the effectiveness of the board in achieving the objectives outlined in that section. 3, review the requirements of the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and Wagner-Payzer Act. Determine if the needs of Vermont's employees and employers would better serve by pursuing a waiver for the requirements of those acts, and update the goals, metrics, and strategies for workforce development in the state of Vermont strategic plan. propose a roadmap, staffing plan, and budget for an integrated state workforce plan that spans all workforce service delivery systems and all existing workforce-related strategic plans. I think that is a very big charge, and I'm here to help, but I am not the world's expert on any of this. I was around when 10 VSA 540 and 10 VSA 541A were rewritten in the legislature, and that was born in part of the work done by the previous special committees and study committees that had worked that I mentioned. 10 VSA 540, Chairman Marcotte, do you want me to proceed to 540 here?
So before we move on, is there any questions from any committee members on what David has just gone through? Sarah?
I have a question about this is just a little unfamiliar to me, and maybe David can answer it, but maybe Mike or Allison, you can. When you say the development of the State of Vermont Strategic Plan 2018 to 2023 dated January 3, 2018, that doesn't translate exactly to a document that I know to be in existence. I think I think I know what it's a reference to, but it's not a exact reference. Do you guys know what that was supposed to be about? Or David, do you have an indication of what that is? The State of Vermont Strategic Plan. Was that intended to be a reference to WIOA, the WIOA state plan?
I
no one knows?
I believe it is.
Okay. Because it's
not. Yeah, but I think the thought here is, how do we expand that plan to include all workforce?
Yeah,
right?
and do we want to, is that really the vehicle that we want to touch? And I think with either my guidance or other guidance, I would, when we get down to the decision making and discussion, I would just caution the committee now to say there are other documents or other ways forward, and that's that we may want to consider. But I now understand that that is what you had thought would be the vehicle for making state changes.
So what David has on his screen, was that, it was David, was that you sharing your screen?
Yes.
So yeah, that is not the WIOA state plan, what David just had up. That is
Right.
our administration's old strategic plan document, which
Right.
for the committee's awareness, we are actually in the final stages of updating and are going to have an FY23 through FY25 updated strategic plan posted within the next month. I have the draft of it in my hand here. And so that again, we don't have to dive into this now. This is something that the governor works on, the agencies and departments and putting together. I'm happy to share the workforce related pieces in here. And again, maybe at another meeting, either Adam or Abby, we know, I think everyone here knows that the State Workforce Development Board is also working on a strategic plan. And how does that kind of complement what exists here? So maybe that's, again, I don't know if that's the time, but maybe this is going to be received as good news if at least for Senator Clarkson and Rep. Marcotte, if you like what we have in here, then in our updates, then this is potentially something that this task force doesn't need to put as much time into compared to some of the other charges.
Right. We should obviously review it and figure out how we integrate it into our work.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think maybe we need to better understand how many strategic plans are out there.
And,
right.
And what the requirements of those plans are. Yeah.
There's so many strategic plans. Like
right.
Again, Sarah mentioned WIOA. We have one.
We have a department.
Working on one.
I'm working on a division plan.
Yeah, and I mean, does AHS, what kind of plan do they have? And
for workforce.
Yeah.
Some of theirs is reflected. Like I could show you once it's. I could talk about if I have authority to show some draft versions of it or not.
Yep.
Again, like I said, we'll be done with it in at least I think 3 weeks more.
And just think now, Pat Moulton is, the state colleges alone have a plan.
Yes.
So this is, I think, one of the nuts we're trying to crack, which is how is this all coordinated? who has their, who or what entity has their eyes on all these pieces and can pull them into alignment so that we are not competing, wasting time competing with each other, wasting time spinning our wheels in one rut when we could be pulling ourselves out of these. Doesn't need to be perpetually mud season on workforce development.
Well, and I want to make sure that the committee doesn't lose sight of, we're not talking just about outside of state government, but we need to really think about inside of state government as well. How do we promote workforce development within state government as well?
Yeah.
Sarah?
So what I propose, I don't know that we as a committee have the capacity and all of the things available to us to pull information and do our own research project. What I would propose is that if 100,000 or 75,000, we select some sort of ballpark amount, and at the very least get the ball rolling with what we want for research to come back, even if it's like a phased contract and we decide next time, oh, we want this other piece, we tack it on to another simplified bid for a different scope of work. But I would strongly urge us to begin the collection process, either where maybe we convene as a small group and bring it back, or we somehow, but I know there are other things that we've even mentioned that we would want as part of that research project. And it may not be recommendations at this point, but just gathering that information about 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
And presenting it to us in a way that's clear. I think the development of the action plan and the recommendations around what good organization looks like is sort of a separate project and may even be a different set of expertise. But surveying state government and the authorities and the statutes and outside of state government, if we were to point to either at the federal level or the community level, some of the other entities and understanding their involvement, that seems to me to be our first step in trying to write our list of what we want the research to be. And if we could have that by the end of September, then we can start having deeper conversations about what changes, where we want to start changing things.
Right. And I think that's all of that data that needs to be collected will help us decide, is there another entity that we need to focus on that becomes the overarching head of workforce development? And here's the list of things that they need to take care of or be aware of or coordinate with.
Or coordinate, actively coordinate.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where like the analysis of what other states do, because I also am familiar with how other states have, coordinated the distribution of funds, the placement of the board, the authority of the board, and how the board's activities play into different things. So I think that's almost a different skill set than what we first need for us as committee members to understand as the complete lay of the land and the magnitude, without getting too frustrated, but like the magnitude of the stakeholders and players and responsibilities.
Dustin? Or is it Deb? Deb.
Oh, it's Deb. I'm just wondering if between now and the next meeting, if our office can work with, a couple of folks and maybe think through a way we can fashion an RFP that, might get us not only the research we may be looking for, but maybe we sort it through categories where one or more vendors could bid on any one category, where we could split up, the contracts and an RFP. But it may be something, if we sit down and maybe can talk about how we can approach it, we're happy to work with anyone on that thought process. We have a few ideas that we could do. Yeah.
I think that's a good idea.
I think that's a great idea, because I like Kendall's idea of getting, this out and off with opening it up for proposals by the end of August. I mean, we have such a time crunch that I think it strikes me that from everything I've heard, the simplified bid process sounds like it makes the most amount of sense, but we can speed that along by really just simplifying this and asking them to address the key two first pieces, the first three pieces, 1, 2, and 3. Or yeah, 1, 2, and then F, and then yeah, 1 and 2 really, with maybe part of F1, which I think Sarah was suggesting.
Yeah, I was looking at what F1, 2, and 3 at the very least, and then adding a couple, because I think we're missing some key things that everyone needs to consider the role of the one-stop system. But I was thinking of that as the research, and unless you're saying that phase 2 would be, now let's look at the organizational piece, considering also how it already exists in 1. Maybe that's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I guess I guess I would be cautious about the need to move as quickly as possible, because I think we all want a product to come out of this that is going to move us forward in workforce development within the state. And I don't want to move it too fast if just to make sure we meet the deadlines. So
I agree.
Yeah. So
I agree.
I think it's good that we get started on I think we need to think about this in phases, and if it's going to take more time to get us to the end, then we can work that in later.
So I'm a bear of simple brain, and for me, beginning with I mean, Sarah, you live and breathe this, and Mike and I live it, but don't necessarily breathe it as fully. But for me, I would love to begin with the national perspective. I guess I would really love to understand how other states deal with the same requirements we have to deal with, and how they coordinate it, and how they manage non-government and government entities, and how they coordinate it. I'd like to start big and hone in. I mean, and that, I don't know where it starts, whether it's F1, 2, and 3, or whether it's 1 and 2, but I would really love to have a better understanding of what other states do effectively. And to focus in on states that are comparable to us, not identical, because nobody's identical, but really get a better national sense and then hone it in. And I'm sorry if that's too simplistic for everybody, but that's sort of what I know I'd love to start with. And I don't know if we can do that ASAP and do the simplified bid piece on that.
I think you're right. And, we need to look at, are they successful, and how do you measure that success? Dustin?
Yeah, just putting my Kendall hat on. As long as we kind of work on the legislature's timeline when it comes to policy proposals, so we're already in that process, in the administration, making sure if we're going to have action for next session, that there's a hall pass, right? Like something comes in late, air quotes late, but this group and the governor really want to make it happen. As long as there's a hall pass, so that that can get into some vehicle, that would be good. The other thing I would say, Allison, nationally, and Sarah will probably agree, I don't think there's any state that's really good at this, right? I think there's different models, but everybody has their challenges. And I think that a place to start might be the intersection with WIOA and everything else, and how we're different than every other state in a lot of different ways. Size of board, things like this, where we are really an outlier. So there might not be a gold standard to look at, but I think what you will see when we start to dive into this is that we're the outlier. We're the big different group that does something much different than other states, and whether or not that's Whether or not that's like that for a reason, or other states are more successful with kind of a less complicated structure where WIOA meets kind of private sector and NGOs. That's what we're going to see, and it will be fascinating because I think all the time we go to these, sometimes we go to these national organizations and we talk about the size of our board and the interplay with the legislature, and like, holy God, that sounds complicated. So a lot of other states are going to look a lot alike, but not like us.
Okay, so yeah, I think we'll when we get to the WIOA, we need to understand what the federal regulations are, because my understanding was when we reconstituted this a number of years ago was that we had to have a board of this size in order to meet WIOA requirements. Now, if we don't, then we need to revisit that. But that's just part of the information gathering. Sarah?
Yeah, so I think to try to, I don't know, I'm going to just try to attempt to say, like, can I summarize what I'm hearing and see if there's an action step? I think your approach is sound, Allison, and the way that I would see this playing out is putting out a request that specifies, and I think we have to be very specific, because having done a couple of these contracts before, if we're not specific about what we ask for, it comes back, and we're going to have to, we as a committee are going to have to make some decisions about what specifically we want, and not just say read our minds. But if we were to frame, here are the federal requirements we would like for you to outline for us that are standard across the country with regard to workforce development. And again, I would add just a couple of things here because I think it's really important context. Perkins and the one-stop system. Ask a consultant to outline the federal requirements and then give examples of 3 to 5 methods of delivery and how states are different in how they, both in governance and organizational structure. But we'll have to be specific about when we say governance. I know I have some thoughts about what I've seen and how we could ask them to differentiate. And then organizational structure is how is state government versus this marriage that some states have between private and nonprofit and government activity. What I am a little bit hesitant about and think that we would all have to get into agreement on is how successful are they, Mike? When you said what does success mean? Because all of this is my standard response to all of you guys whenever you ask how successful we are. Here are the performance measures, and you say, well, these aren't adequate. I agree. No consultant will be able to say how successful they are, except for showing you what already exists as our performance measures. What we may have to do, if you still want to add that component and you don't want to leave it to us to say that is success, is find those measures like jobs, employment rates, income, those other measures that will take a separate analysis. And we just would all need to be on the same page as what we define success is, at least in terms of the federal system. Maybe it's ease of governance, other things. So I see that as a starting point, and then taking our analysis of how we do things at the state level and in state government and a parallel but secondary track once we understand some of the options, so we can kind of fit that in our brains into a potential action plan approach. I'll give it over to Adam.
Yeah, a couple things just on the difference between Vermont and other states. So we're a one state shop, so that's unique. Not a lot of other states have that. So
what? Sorry, Adam. What? I have to interrupt. What do you mean by a one state
one-stop shop? So we only have one official board. Many other states have a statewide board and local boards. So at some point in time, this was a decision, and I don't know. My experience in speaking with NGA folks is, oh, you're so lucky. You're a one-stop shop state with only one office. Others are like, oh, how can you get it done? So I think, there's trade-offs. But I think this group should understand why that decision was made. Is it something we want to continue? I think that could help inform a lot of other things. Secondly, I think, the charge of, when I read the legislation here, I agree that what we need is a leader in this space, and that's what we're lacking.
Yeah.
So we're sort of down in the wonkiness right now, but I think for me, the inspiration behind this is empowering one entity to bring everybody together, center of gravity, not through authority, but truly through collaboration of all the various elements that ends up just everybody defaults to that. That's the center of gravity on that. It also helps perform all of the WIOA requirements. But in addition, it's seen as the leader and people just know that's where to go. So I don't want to lose that as we write this RFP, keeping that in mind. And we can't necessarily dictate that, but we can certainly set the stage for that.
Right. And that is certainly where our committees were, that is certainly a large piece of what inspired this section.
Right.
Yep.
Looking for leadership independent of those who are charged with servicing it. I mean, that was the challenge, is you can't do both. You can't both service and lead and coordinate it all with a and
so I don't know, is there someone, or and maybe this, I'm going to look to Sarah for this, probably knows where all the documents are, is for this group, is there some sort of data share that we could have in regards to, I just dug up the workforce education and training inventory from 2016. There's all of these documents that exist. I don't know how deep into the weeds we're going to be able to get as the committee, but certainly at least knowing where those documents are could help.
Was that Michelle's and Chris's work? Yes, I believe it was 2016.
Yeah.
Because we worked off that when I went on the committee in 17. That makes sense that's the date of that inventory.
Yeah, and the department, has come to the legislature and said we're not going to spend, 110 hours every year updating it because it's not meeting any purpose. So we've but that is still a duty of the commissioner. One thing I can supply a bunch of documents. I would, especially like just the legal documents, like here are the statutory provisions, here are the TGLs, which are the sort of directives and things like that. Not because I think the committee is going to enjoy reading them or trying to analyze them themselves, but they may be the basis for which, like, those are standard for all my counterparts in other states. And that may be where we want to begin directing someone to say, what does this mean? So that I don't have to spend 40 hours trying to give a class on that. But, what does this mean? And then what does it look like? How do other states interpret this and implement it? And I have some good lead documents for that we could, if we had a document repository, I think would be useful for all of you to kind of see.
Okay. Kendall, and then I think we have about 20 minutes left before Kendall leaves us, and I don't know what everybody else's time frame is, but
and Abby, so why the building that Abby and I are in is going to have an evacuation drill at 10. So if we are still on this call and all of a sudden there's like lights and loud music and Abby and I quickly, and we're not in a state of emergency. But that is why we have a hard stop. I have a hard stop at 10 because I will have to leave my seat. But I wanted to flag that, and I can put this if we create a document repository, that the Chief Performance Officer, Sue Zeller, at the time in 2018, did an updated workforce state government program inventory that I'm happy to add to that program repository that might be slightly more updated than the 16 and 17 documents that you're referring to.
Kendall, you had talked about a website within the Agency of Administration.
Yes.
I mean, would it be easier? Is that accessible to all of us? I mean,
it's a public, it's a public, right now it's set up to be like a public landing page that Melissa has the credentials to add things like post meeting videos or post documents. So there's a question where again, I don't know if we want to put all of our internal working documents on the public landing page. Again, I'm not sure what, I'm looking maybe to David on like open meeting law, or if there's like a other back end file that we want to have to review some of this stuff.
Something as simple as shared Google Docs, or do you guys not?
Maybe so the other thing I'll just flag that maybe again everyone knows, but at least for Sarah and I, everything that we share and that you share with us will be public record regardless if we ever get FOIA'd. So I'm just putting that disclaimer out regardless of if it's on Google Docs or a state drive. Just FYI.
Right. So
Yep.
I just want to clarify that once we learn how to access the AOA webpage,
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing. So far, everything we've discussed, I think, would be easily shared by anybody who wants to read it. If people want to wade through the documents that Sarah is suggesting posting, good, bravo to them. So, wow. And they get a gold star. I think we should share as much as we can, because the more minds that are brought to bear on this, maybe the better. But in terms of our 20 minutes, I'd love for us to land on a simplified RFP so that we can move forward on that, so that we can get somebody to work with us, giving us a national perspective, honing in on the WIOA, Perkins, and One Stop that Sarah has suggested, that we understand the methods of delivery, how states differ, within parameters of states, because we don't obviously want to be looking at California and us. I mean, that's ridiculous. But and getting suggestions maybe from them about adding to what we should discuss. What does success look like? I think that's one of the key things, is what does success look like to all of us? I mean, but I think we need to move. You've lit that fire under us to understand how we need to move on getting a simplified bid process out ASAP. So I don't know how we come into agreement on what we're looking for, but let's do that in the next 15 minutes that we have.
Okay, so can I suggest that we have 2 or 3 people that can work with Deb on putting together what we're looking for in an RFP, and then we share it with everyone, and we can either hold another meeting to go over that and then get it out within the next week or so, or we just share it and everybody looks at it and put
signs
their
off
comments in, and then sign off on it, and then we can go from there. Does that make sense? Okay.
I have no expertise in that.
I would like to be involved in the subcommittee,
Okay.
some way, shape, or form.
And Mike, I just have to ask, are you going to be at the CSG conference?
No. I
Okay.
can't get away from here. I'm tied to the store right now.
I may just have to go up there and tie something to you and drag you off. Speaking of tying, anyway,
I think you'd have to fight my wife on that one.
The only thing, because their CSG is doing a whole workforce development piece this time, so I just was curious if you're going to be there, because I was going to suggest Mike and I are going to be together, but I guess we're not. And I don't think Sarah, you or Dustin are going to be there either at CSG.
No, I'm going to NASWA, the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. That will be my maiden voyage out of COVID travel for work in September. And I'm bringing a bunch of my staff to that to try to look at some of the new innovative stuff. But I'm happy to work on some of the meat of the RFP. Like, here are some of the things we could look at and what we'd be asking for. What I would be really hesitant about, maybe we can do this via email, is if we need to include in this that we want someone to assess or give us measures by which we can assess success, that I feel like really needs the whole committee's sort of agreement on what those measures are. The research and the comparison part, I feel like is fine to delegate to a subcommittee, but maybe we come up with a proposal, and in the next meeting, we really dive into what success looks like. But maybe that means it takes too long. So I don't know what you think about that, Kendall, or. Adam or Mike or Allison.
I think, this initial phase one is data gathering so that we can better understand what is going on out there, what other states are doing, what are the requirements, how can we do things, analyzing what we do against what others are doing, that type of thing. I think that's what we're looking for right now, is that.
So how would folks feel about if Sarah and I did the first cut to be shared with the full committee of some deliverables for the RFP? Would folks, and then for comment, would folks feel open to that?
I think if you would be kind enough to take a first cut at that, but I think I would hope with an eye to getting this phase one consultancy big picture. I call it the phase one big picture consult.
Yep.
So that we can get that out ASAP, because I think you had said we could maybe get that out, or Deb said at the end of August. And so that if we can be working with somebody by mid-September, gosh, I think that would be great.
Adam?
Do we then, do we leap to the phase two? Do we try to set up a phase two process for starting in December with a separate RFP? If this phase one is only going out to collect the data, we anticipate receiving data, whether it's the same entity or a different entity, that then helps us develop in a really the charge of the committee, the response. Or are we just saying right now, we'll deal with that in December, and unlikely then will we have a product January 15th?
I need a work plan.
Data.
Yeah, Kendall's right. We need a work plan on how to accomplish what we want to accomplish.
Yeah.
So
let's figure that out.
we need to develop that.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to. I can't spearhead a work plan, but I'm wondering, Adam, if you, me, and Kendall want to try to also draft, like, what might a work plan look like, and come back to you guys with that
for our next meeting.
Yeah, just like here are sort of the deliverables, and then we can reorganize. Okay, that's the wrong order. That's the wrong timeline. That discussion's going to need more people. We need to tee that up first.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to approach it myself.
Yeah.
Deb?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, Sarah and Kendall, is it possible that I can connect with you on maybe a couple ways we can approach a solicitation as we're working on, or as you're working on identifying those deliverables. And it may help us in the long run, a couple thoughts that we might have there. So if I can connect with you all sooner versus later, and then you can bring it back to the team here. That'd be great.
That sounds great, to be able to present the team some options. Here's our options. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so go ahead, Allison.
Well, I mean, just to answer Adam, I'm not interested. I mean, phase one for me, we should look at the work plan, I think, and decide what we want to accomplish in phase one. But data collection is understanding what the national picture more fully, understanding what our requirements as a state as a result of those, the national, the federal requirements, and understanding better what needs to be coordinated. And that's, we have our sort of our inventory, but just so data is just the beginning. I would hope we would be accomplishing a lot more in phase one than that. I mean, I would, I'm not sure what, but as we look at the work plan, I think we can figure out what we want to accomplish in phase one.
Great. Yeah, I think you're right, Allison, and I think if we put this out, it's going to be months of waiting. So we're not going to just sit idly by. So that work plan can help identify what we're doing in the interim, what kind of public engagement. There's a lot of people who are going to want to have input into this. How are we going to solicit that? How are we going to process that? Yeah, lots to do.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of, hopefully, whoever is selected will have a lot of data already available. So for, that we can, particularly as we hone it to the states that are appropriate for us to be looking at in terms of, whatever lens we want to establish that we're looking through.
And so I think throughout the discussion, I think everybody has a good idea of kind of what we're trying to accomplish, and maybe Kendall and Adam and Sarah can try to put that together and bring it back to us.
Yeah. And again, also just to not to duplicate efforts so much, it would be great to see if we can use anything the state board is working on at also in this, because Adam, you and Abby are, we're, and Sarah, I mean, we're all, I would hope we could kill two birds with one stone, I guess is what I hate to use violent metaphors, but.
Feed two birds with one scone.
Thank you. Feed two birds with one kernel of corn.
One scone, yep.
Oh,
I learned that from Ellen, actually. I think she used it once and I picked up on it super quick.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome.
Ellen does use that.
Yeah, I like it too.
Yeah. But we also want to make sure that the product that we're talking about is beyond WIOA.
Yes.
Right? So the State Workforce Development Board that's what they're concentrated on.
I realize
we need to use what they're gathering, but we also need to understand what's going on outside of WIOA as well, so that we
and beyond state
Yep.
and beyond state administered programs, like beyond the Department of Labor, because when you mentioned Pat, Pat and I are meeting now pretty regularly, and that's great. But there's a coordinated function that needs to continue, not just at a voluntary level.
Exactly. It's Pat, it's AHS, it's all the other players, it's the state college, it's all of it.
Okay. Adam?
Yeah, that brings up a great point is, how does this committee want to work with, do we bring Pat in? I mean, or, is she missing? Do we have others who can participate on a regular basis, adding them to the agenda? In what way do we manage that? Is it by invite only? Is it by interest? We should talk that through. Ellen is a great case in point here today. Has a lot of knowledge about this. How do we want to have people be able to engage?
Right, exactly.
I think you guys have to figure out what those boundaries are, right? Because you could literally go forever as far as trying to bring in and encompass the entire quote unquote workforce development system, right? I think you really have to figure out what the scope of this is going to be, whether it's state and state partners, right? So think like the state colleges, like the universities, but you could go all the way down to, restorative justice and recovery centers, and there are a lot of places that do some sort of training or workforce development or interview interview prep and things like this. And I think that Ellen and I and Sarah have been down that rabbit hole for 6 years, and I think part of the problem is that we haven't really tried to put a guardrail around what part of the environment we want to shape. And at some point you've got to stop, right? At some point you've got to say, we're going to go out to the CTE and the adult basic ed and into the community partners, and that's where we're going to stop. Because if you don't stop, it is so massive. I just remember the mapping project. It got so big that it's a bear. And to be effective, I think the division between WIOA and non-WIOA state programs is very important, and that is something we've got to get our hands on. But at some point, you've got to draw a line around this is the group of partners that we're working with to start, right? I think inevitably the goal of having our hands around the whole thing at some point is a really, really good long-term goal. But if we don't put guardrails on this, it's gonna spiral, and we're gonna live in the rabbit hole that Sarah pokes her head out of every now and again. And I think that trying to identify that, and maybe starting with the list that Sue Zeller made with the state stuff, and then the other piece of information that might be helpful for this group is the RDC report from the statewide workforce summits that we did right before the pandemic, right? I think we reported back on those in February of 20, and then the world ended. So we never really got anywhere with that, because they weren't perfect, but it's really good information from the regional partners. So I would say guardrails for one, and then trying to take, maybe in passing, taking a look at that report as well that we did back in January of
20.
I'm sorry, yep, 20. Came out of a bill from 19, right, Allison? I think.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
So who has that, and who might be kind enough to either post it or circulate it to all of us to read?
We've got it somewhere, yeah. We can find that.
And David probably.
I'll circulate to everybody as we figure out from whether AOA is where they can be the repository, but I'll throw about 7 to 10 documents, including the regulatory stuff and the more recent reports that we've had, the updates on Act 189 and other things, so that you have a place that you see something missing. I'm sure we can find it, but I don't mind seeding the inventory if you want first.
And will someone share with us how to navigate the AOA website and how to find our little spot?
I can ask Melissa to send around the link. I personally have also not gone to it yet, so I can have Melissa send the link.
That would be great. And I know you're about to turn into evacuated toast.
If I jump, I'm sorry.
So how do we want to? So our subcommittee is going to meet. You're going to circulate the idea for what we're looking for with an RFP, a simplified bid process, right? We're getting that moving with your subcommittee.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do we want to keep meeting right now with Abby and Kendall, and maybe they can rejoin us in 10 or 15 minutes after they've gone out and come back? Or
I got to go to a doctor's appointment, but I can stay for about 5 more minutes.
Yeah, so let's
figure
out in 5 more minutes what our next steps are in terms of either subcommittee meeting or meeting. And, quite honestly, I often feel that, we set these boundaries because we don't know we knew how big the challenge was with this. 6 meetings is a joke. So, and we don't want to just be meeting in subcommittee given how tiny our group is already. I'm not going to be deterred by that 6 meetings, I think. Anyway, when do we want to meet next, and what do we want to accomplish at that next meeting? Because I think what does success look like does need to be addressed. Sarah raised, I've raised that we need to. What do we want to accomplish at our next meeting? And I definitely hope we'll be able to sign off on this RFP and move forward on finding a consultant.
I would offer that I think we need to meet again in 2 weeks.
I do too, because we need to.
I have an all-staff retreat, our first. So if it's 2 weeks from today, I won't be available, but the 26th potentially. And I just threw 3 action items that maybe we could address for the meeting in 2 weeks.
I could ask Melissa to work with us again if we're in agreement that we should meet the week of the are we thinking the week of the 22nd or the 29th?
I'd love the 29th if possible. Gets me on the other side of an important week.
So if we want to do the week of the 29th, I could have Melissa do what she did before and work with us all to identify the appropriate time and date in that window.
Yeah, you're a staff retreat, Sarah, the week of the 22nd.
Yeah, we've got we're calling a workforce development summit on the 25th in Barnard. You can swing by.
In Barnard?
Yeah, I booked us at Silver Lake.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I'd love to come by if you wanted to invite me for a moment. I will.
Week of the 29th.
Yeah. How about that Tuesday in the morning? You know, during campaign season, mornings are clearly better than afternoons. But a morning like the Tuesday or Wednesday or would be fine. At the moment, they are happily clear. And Labor Day is the weekend of the 3rd, 4th, 5th.
I will meet on August 30th if you all will agree to sing happy birthday to me.
Oh,
And then
happy
Fellow
birthday.
Virgo.
Yeah.
Yay.
So is this, could we do 8:30 again? Does this work?
Works for me.
Fine with me.
8:30 on the 30th.
Adam, does that work for you too?
I have some background noise, so I'm staying muted.
All right,
Okay.
we'll reconvene then, and at that meeting, we will review what's been put together as potentially the bones of a work plan, as well as the scope of the first RFP, and we can potentially circulate those materials beforehand as well, hopefully.
Right. I would encourage us to email things to us instead of just posting them on this website, which I don't even yet know how to address. And Sarah, you putting things in the chat means we'll never see them again. So would you mind emailing those thoughts to us?
Yeah, Abby, will you capture them and put them in the notes?
I have no idea how to
Yes,
you know.
I can do that.
Yeah, and I'm on a Mac, so I don't have chat.
It's just
I'm on a Mac, and I'm sure there's chat here somewhere. It says chat up there in a little bubble.
It's only the link, correct, Sarah? I can send that out. There's nothing else in there that I see. No documents. Okay, I can send that out.
Sarah or Kendall, we'll coordinate offline connecting?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and sort of last do we want to talk with Mike Ferrand about doing Zoom, because that would mean we could be more easily accessible. I think, Mike, do you want to take that conversation on with Mike?
I'll get in touch with Mike, and then if that can be done, Melissa can loop Mike in so that he's aware of the timeframes that we're looking at, and have someone scheduled to get us on Zoom.
I think that sounds great.
So we didn't get through with David the reviews of 1, 2, and 3 yet. So I would suggest that that's really something we need to hear from, and we should start our next meeting out with that, and then look at the RFP. Does that make sense? Because I think go ahead.
I was sort of thinking that the RFP would supplement David's review and analysis, but if David, you want to be the subject matter expert.
No, it's not subject matter expert. I think what my thought is that the committee really needs to walk through and have that real good understanding of exactly what the Commissioner of Department of Labor is charged with and what the statute says, and then looking at the composition of, what statute says the composition of the State Workforce Development Board is, the reasons for that, and also have a, kind of a high level of understanding of WIOA and Wagner-Pfizer as we, and then continue to go forward from there. So without having that background and the refreshment for everybody that doesn't work in this all the time, I think that's more beneficial to all of us.
So, Mike, I think it would be critically important for David to walk us through the statute on both of those.
Yep.
And then have Sarah and Dustin talk to us about, in reality, what is it really looking like?
Yep.
In reality, what's happening? I mean,
Right.
that makes the charge.
Yep.
Statutorily, but how is that being realized?
Right.
In
Well,
real life?
yeah. How does it look when
Yeah.
it's implemented?
So I would like that from Adam, from the State Workforce Development Board. I'd like it from, so we have the statute, let's review, but then let's review the reality.
Right. So
As
so
honestly as we can.
Yep. So we can have David run through, then we'll ask Adam and Abby and Sarah to now how is this working in real life?
You maybe.
Yeah, I think part of that could be the understanding the decision to go to a single state shop versus a local. And then also something we haven't talked about yet is, in maybe not as important up front, but I think is still critical, is the state workforce board budget. How does that work? What is it? We have a meeting, Abby, this Friday, I think. I may be a few minutes late to that. I've got a doctor's appointment to get an overview from DOL on the budget process. But that's critical to understanding some of the reality of how it's being implemented.
Yeah,
And just to take that a step further is that our reliance on federal dollars is so much on workforce, and very little general fund dollars are going towards workforce as far as DOL is concerned, that we need to have that discussion of, when the budget's being developed, should there be dollars allocated in the budget from general fund in order to prop up what's going on in workforce development? And because we know we're losing the federal dollars, it's either they're stagnant, we're not getting what we used to get, but we're asking the department and the State Workforce Development Board to continue to do more and more with less and less money. So we need to have that discussion too, because that needs to be part of our recommendation as well.
Absolutely. And it's one of the critical pieces we as legislators can bring to the table is the money.
Right.
I think another piece, David, to go through is the difference between the federal requirements for the board and the state requirements for the board, because they're very different.
Yikes.
Yep.
I hadn't realized that.
Yep. They're very different.
David, I'm happy I've written some memos on all these topics at various times for both the board and other interested parties, and I'm happy to share those with you if you want.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I don't think there's that's ton of complication or magic between 540 and 541A and then 29 USC 3111, which prescribes the minimum requirements for the state workforce development boards. I can cover those pretty easily and pretty quickly. Okay. As I shared with Mike yesterday, between the statutes and the rules, WIOA comprises thousands of pages of federal law. So that's not one that's just like going to be easily reduced to, it's not simple.
I think Sarah, I think David, though, going through the titles, right? WIOA has specific title. I mean, WIOA was basically 4 federal programs that got built into a snowball in 2014. So maybe just going through the titles and what those dollars are allocated for, what those specific programs are, which state agencies actually do those, right? I think people may or may not know that Voc Rehab is a WIOA program that is dealt with by AHS, not DOL. So maybe just a very broad overview, and then Sarah can kind of talk about the programmatic gymnastics that they have to do. But certainly just a high level WIOA overview, I think would be good for. I mean, honestly, it would be good for me too. Sarah's probably the only one that has the full understanding of what it is. But then also Wagner Pizer and Perkins right? I mean, this is the reality. Is the rabbit hole is huge. You know, it's like trying to figure out where federal tax dollars end up. But I think keeping a high level is going to be important.
Yeah, so so I think that's a great point, and I agree with you. And respectfully to the committee, I hate to volunteer Sarah necessarily, but you know, she already knows
Well, she
all
left
that
the
stuff.
meeting, so you can volunteer her for anything.
Right.
Well, I'm just saying I could spend the next, 400 hours learning all that from scratch, or she could give you the thing that she does all day, every day, and knows
Right.
what's going on.
I honestly think, and I would say this if she was here, so I'm not speaking out of class, it might be good just to have a high level without Sarah diving into the specifics, because the specifics are what lose people, right? I think if we can kind of tailor the conversation to WIOA for people who know a little bit about workforce development but aren't WIOA program directors or a workforce development director, I think that would be helpful, because what I think it'll do, David, is it'll give us an understanding of what is in WIOA and what's not in WIOA, right? So just the programs, the titles, the programs. We don't need to worry about the program metrics yet. We don't need to worry about how they're instituted yet. We don't need to worry about, which person sits at what desk at the Department of Labor and why it's really difficult for them. But I think if this core group just could better understand why it's so hard to do stuff other than WIOA, right? I think Adam and I have had this conversation forever. WIOA is such a comprehensive, and it's actually not comprehensive. It's very complicated, but it only deals with a very small portion of the environment that we want to work in here. So I think by defining what that environment is and why labor is so dedicated to that, like 85 to 90% of our time is dedicated in the workforce development division to that. I think it'll give people a really good understanding as to why it's hard to do it's harder for labor to do some of the non-WIOA stuff and break out of that very specific federally mandated track. And if they can understand those programs, what they are, what they do, dislocated worker, youth, this stuff, then it's really easy to see why it's hard for the state to say, all right, how do we work with Adam on a workforce development plan for Southern Vermont outside of WIOA? How do we find the time and the funds to do that, right? How do we work with Global Foundries or General Dynamics or what's the place up in St. Johnsbury there? Weidman. Yep. How do we build them a workforce development plan when their folks might not qualify for WIOA and don't have access to those dollars? So understanding what we're able to do with WIOA funds is going to really give folks a better understanding of what we can't do with WIOA funds and where we might need to fill the gaps in some of those places that the federal government just isn't willing to let us spend workforce development dollars on.
Well, and I think, Dustin, that is the key thing we need to better understand is how this works in reality and where its failures are and where the gaps are. And so understanding what it is and what its challenges are for us. I think Mike and I, Sarah's and you are maybe clearer on that than Mike and I are.
I probably am. Sarah is definitely the most clear. But that is the hurdle, right? The hurdle is trying to, in my brain, trying to break out of that WIOA mold so that we can do more creative and more nimble things as we can with, that's what we can do with state dollars, right? They don't have all of the federal prescriptions.
And at the last minute, as we negotiate the budget, that's not the time to understand it. We have to go into those discussions, understanding what we can and can't do. So I think that's why we need to understand what it is, what the requirements are to the state, and how it works in reality, and how this is a piece of how it works in reality. It doesn't fund X, Y, and Z. It funds A, B, and C, but it doesn't fund a whole bunch of stuff that we have in our goals of what success looks like. It's not doing a quarter of that.
And in reality, sometimes A, B, and C aren't our biggest problems, right? So we have all this federal money that is very prescriptive to solve a problem that might not be our largest problem. And that's kind of what I meant, Senator, when I said, you know, making sure that we have the time to get, if there are things that we wanted to put in the budget or in legislation, that we have the time to do it, because we all know that by the time March and April rolls around, things are kind of set in stone and it becomes hard to get stuff on a vehicle.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Well, we also need to understand too, where our state training dollars, where are they sitting? How much are we appropriating, you know, to the Vermont training program and ACCD? What are we doing? How are we accessing that? How are we, what used to be the wet funds?
Yep.
You know, all of that, all of those dollars that we're putting state money into, you know, are we putting money in AHS? Are there general fund dollars in there for workforce as well as WIOA dollars? So how is all this stuff intermingling? So I think it's the whole shebang. Kendall, you had your hand up.
This guy's doing Windows. Can we?
I need to scoop.
Yes, I'm on my phone now, so
Kendall, you're breaking up.
I'm gonna go up. I'll be right back.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, if folks can hear me, I want to offer, if we're talking about some ideas in terms of what does success look like for us. In order for me to sell this to the governor and have his buy-in, it's going to be important that any new government reorganization not only addresses workforce training, but workforce expansion. So how is this going to help us bring net new workers into the workforce? And what does the recruitment piece of this look like as well? So I just want to offer that up, that if we're talking about principles and success, again, in order for me to get the governor's buy-in here, we're going to need to be able to show how it's bringing more people into our labor supply.
Yes, which may be that's a more direct question. How does it bring more people into the workforce rather than how do we expand the workforce? The workforce may not need to be expanded, but we need more people filling the jobs that exist that aren't filled.
So a
Yes.
time frame for everybody on the next meeting, an hour and a half obviously is not long enough. Is a half a day enough from 8:30 to 12? I think we need to put that out there for people to make sure that they can join us and be on.
I will not be able to do a half day that week. I'm actually going to be on vacation. And so I was going to plan to just take that out of my vacation day in Maine. So I can do an hour and a half the week of the 29th, but I'm not going to be able to do a half day or a full day that week.
But how about 2 hours? Because clearly this meeting is taking us to 2 hours.
Yep, I can do 2 hours.
That's your unbirthday present to all of us.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Mike, Adam had his hand up for a hot minute.
Adam?
Yeah, it's sort of went by, but it was just in regards to the budgeting, where the dollars go. You know, I think an important piece, at least under the DOL part of this, is, you know, there's this sort of theory out there that there's a lot of repeat customers, that it's not necessarily new customers, and we're not necessarily through those dollars bringing new people into the workforce. Having data to understand if that's a theory, is it true? You know, of the people served, how many have been served prior?
Right.
So if we knew, if that were true, which I don't know it to be true, we in fact would be just, you know, funneling money through programs without actually adding anyone to the workforce. And we can instead develop strategy to manage the folks who are sort of repeat customers in a way that uses some WIOA dollars, but also could leverage ways in which we could free up WIO dollars to be able to go to folks who aren't the repeat. So I don't think at this point we know that, but I think the way in which dollars are spent and who they're spent on is important to understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
At some point. That's not going to be, I know that's not going to be an easy thing to discern. And maybe we have to consider having an outside resource help us with that. If there's a phase 2 for some dollars spent, because it is extraordinarily complicated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I was writing notes about my objectives for things, it's like ease of entry into the workforce system and then tracking support and guidance all the way through it so that you would track everybody so you don't end up with a repeat customer beginning all over again, but you would know exactly where they were, what they'd been exposed to, what they'd been trained in. It would all, it's like integrating those bloody healthcare records. You know, we need to have a seamless ability to know who a person is, what we've invested already in them, and what to do with them.
So I believe, Senator, I believe WIOA has those reporting requirements, right? I think it's wages 6 months after, and wages, well, they're supposed to, right? Through WIOA, you're supposed to be able to track how a client goes through the system from the initial intake to which dollars are spent. And one of those metrics is whether or not they're employed, you know, a period or two after they've exited whichever program they went into. You know, a lot of those are, you know, very similar to somebody that might collect UI, right? They lose their job, they get into a rapid response type program, a dislocated worker program, and then they end up being hired again. I think, you know, one of the things that we were working on pre-pandemic was that, you know, the concept of somebody who has barriers to the workforce, and those are harder nuts to crack. But WIOA has some level of reporting on that level. I don't know if state programs have those levels. I don't know, for example, if somebody goes into an apprenticeship program, if they have that type of reporting. My assumption is they do, especially if it's federal. But as far as state dollars go, a lot of the state dollars are new. I just think about we used to call it the non-degree grant program through VSAC, which we've pumped a pile of money into over the last 5 years, and feels and seems like a great program. I don't know if we track those. Like, I don't know if somebody goes in, gets a certificate, if we follow up with them 6 to 18 months later to see if they're using the certificate, and if they're employed, right? So
Right. So, I mean, I think that's a piece of what does success look like to me, that we know we are following. We just don't have that many people, you know, that we follow. These people know exactly what's happening with everybody.
And a lot of that is manpower, right? A lot of that is having I mean, you know, Sarah can speak more about we're having workforce issue in state government, just like every other business, you know.
I've got emails from some of your people who've quit.
Yeah.
I don't know how, quite honestly, I don't know how to share those with you. They're tough. So, but I get them as their as their senator. And I know representatives are getting them. And I think
maybe a lunch meeting, Senator Clarkson, would be in order to kind of go through that stuff with Mike and I.
Yeah. And because I want to be constructive about all of this together, not just critical.
Yep, it would be good feedback for us too.
So these are all questions that, my committee has gone through before, trying to better understand, gathering more data. But it's tough to follow up with people after they've gone through trainings. We can certainly talk to VSAC about how they deal with the advancement grants, and what kind of data they may have. And it's the same with any of the training programs. How much follow-up can there be? Because it is labor intensive to
Yeah. And yet
follow-ups.
And yet it's key to success. I think it's key to our success in some ways statewide. So
Yep.
A big nut to crack. I need to scoot. What else do we want to do now?
So I think we let Kendall and Adam and Sarah and Abby work on, coming up with and work with Deb on the RFP, and bring that back to us. And Kendall, we work with Melissa on putting an agenda together and.
Yep.
Okay. So we'll I think we've got, the workings of an agenda already. We'll have David come in and go through with us.
Yep,
And then hear from Sarah and Dustin and Adam, Abby on the State Workforce Development Board pieces, and then figure out is there anything else that we need to talk about in this next meeting, and probably go over the RFP, of course, and have those discussions.
Yeah. So reviewing statutory charges, understanding the realities.
Yeah.
And the RFP.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Good start.
So yeah, next meeting, hopefully we'll focus more and try to stay with the agenda. And otherwise we're all over the place already.
Thank you, folks.
Okay, good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And you're going to do Zoom, because hopefully next meeting will be on Zoom.
Yeah, I'll talk to Mike.
Great. Terrific. Thank you, sir. David,
Thanks.
good to see you. Good to see you, Mike. Good to see everybody.
You too. Take care.
See you, Senator. See you, Mike.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.